Climate change continues to be a hot topic of debate. Now, what are some of the causes of climate change? Are the changes to climate cyclical? Gregory Wrightstone likes to discuss climate change. He's a geologist and author of the bestseller Inconvenient Facts, and he joins me from Pennsylvania. Greg, welcome back to BCN.
Oh, great to be back on with you again. We're right in the heart of the climate change alarm season now in the summer with hurricanes and fire. So,
yeah, we've seen some of those wildfires in Southern California, Central California again. But at the same time, in Europe, there are record low temperatures in Sweden and Norway. They're actually having frost in July. Now, some people say, well, that's not called global warming anymore. That's why we call it climate change.
Yeah, if they were record highs, it would be the front page of the New York Times or any of the big papers that would be running on the news every night. When we see record lows, we hear crickets. Because they conflate these high temperatures and any catastrophic event that happens to climate change. And that's what they do. They want to instill this climate of fear, and that's really their object.
Let's talk about your passion discussing climate change then, Greg. Why is it so important to debate this?
Yeah, I got into this. I spent my career as a geologist searching various aspects of the Earth's geologic history. But when I started getting into this, it was really a search for the truth. It was my own search for the truth about climate change. And as I got into it, I went back to the base data and looked at the actual data from NASA, NOAA, peer-reviewed studies, the UN reports. And what I found was frankly shocking. I found that what we were being told by the UN, by the mainstream media and the like, it just ran almost entirely opposite of what I found the science, the facts, and the data tell us. For example, one thing I always use, everybody thinks forest fires in California are increasing. They're not. The forest fires in California this is just one example, over the last 30 years, have declined by almost 50% over the last 30 years. They declined. You wouldn't know that. Nobody knows that. Now, the area burned has increased, but that's a forest management issue. And we can go on. There was another, this what I call the UN extinction host, where the UN came out with a report 2 months ago that there'd be 1 million extinctions over the next several decades. That would require 20,000 to 25,000 species to go extinct every year. Well, I went back and looked at the exact same data. You know what it's been for the last 30 years? I'm not going to make you guess. Two per year. They're saying there'll be 20,000. There's 2 per year. And that's from the IUCN Red List. That's what the science tells us. And what they're doing is they're trying to instill a climate of fear, and we need an alarmed population to pass otherwise onerous and painful regulations like the Paris Climate Accord. Here in the United States, we have our Green New Deal, $90 to $100 trillion for us here in the United States over 10 years. You're experiencing that in Canada right now with a push for wind and solar that's driving up here.
Well, in single-use plastics too, we've chatted a bit about that too, with Ottawa wanting to implement that, but that's taken a seat, that's on the back burner right now with COVID-19. What about some of these climate change scientists that you butted heads with? They're saying, Greg, you're a geologist, leave the climate science to us.
Yeah, well, I've been recently accepted as an expert reviewer for the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's they issue every year a 5-year report. We're in the 6th assessment report. I'm accepted as an expert reviewer in that. I'm a geologist. I'm not a climate science guy, but there's probably 40 different disciplines that are involved in climate change, and this is one of them. And it's a big, big important thing because as a geologist, I look at the big picture. I look at not decades of temperature, a couple hundred years, but I look at centuries, thousands of years, and millions of years of data to show that what we're experiencing now, we're in a 300 plus year warming trend. There's no doubt we are. That's just a fact. We're in this warming trend, but it looks very similar to many other warming trends in the past that were warmer than what we are today. The last one was called the medieval warm period. And these other warm periods that we saw, this is what's fascinating. I'm working on my new book now, and I'm dealing really, taking a deep dive into the relationship between the rise and fall of temperature and the rise and fall of humanity and civilization. And there's just a strong correlation during each of the previous warm periods, again, warmer than we are today. Great civilizations rose up. People prospered. Food was bountiful. No one went hungry. It was the cold periods that were horrific. Mass depopulation, starvation, famine. And I don't know if we have time, there's just a great story relating climate change and the witch hunts of the late Middle Ages. 30 to 40,000 witches were burned at the stake and killed during the cold of what's called the Little Ice Age. As it started getting cold, crops failed, famine set in, and they blamed it on weather causing witches. And I've got a chart that's going to be in my book showing the number of witches killed per decade versus temperature, and there's this great correlation. And it's fascinating when people hear that, they go, huh. So I always say, fear the cold. But we're being told, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it can't get more than 1.5 degrees centigrade colder than or warmer than it is today, or we're all going to die. No, we're not. History tells us just the opposite.
Greg, let's talk about the big bucks involved in climate change. It's made Al Gore a multimillionaire. Last report says he's worth over $330 million.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised it's not higher than that. I am shocked that it's only 330 million. I don't get angry at Al Gore so much because he's not a scientist. He's used something and to make money. It's the scientists that really make me angry that are using this to their own benefit, and frankly, in a lot of cases, lying to us.
Now, in a blog you wrote in May of this year, you mentioned that the Earth has recorded its 600 millionth consecutive cooler than average month. This may go against that popular doctrine of, like we discussed earlier, the global warming.
Oh, absolutely. What they're doing, they being the climate alarmists, are looking at, we're warmer today than it's been in hundreds of years. Well, that's true. Because again, we're in a warming trend. Each decade should get a little bit warmer. But I look at the big picture, again, as a geologist, we're really in some of the coldest period of Earth's history. We're in these glacial periods. We happen to be in a warm, what's called an interglacial cycle between the glacial advances. And the next advance of glaciers is going to be horrific, and it will affect you in Canada the worst. When it comes, we know what happened the last time. Virtually all of Canada was under hundreds and thousands of feet of ice. And it's going to be bad. It's going to be really, really, really bad. Again, fear the cold. And it doesn't have to be an advance of the ice sheet, but just another cold period like the Little Ice Age I talked about with the witch hunts. During that period, it's estimated that 50% of the population of Iceland perished, a third of the entire population of the Earth perished. And if we look also, it's, again, I say this a lot, it's just opposite of what we're being told. We're being told that people are going to die when it gets warm. If we look at excessive deaths, at deaths related to temperature, we find that 15 to 20 times as many people die related to heat, related to cold as to heat. So 15 to 20 times as many people die cold-related deaths as they do heat-related deaths. So it only the common sense person would listen to that, see the data, and say, well, global warming will save lives. When these climate enthusiasts hear me saying that, their heads explode. But it's a fact. It's just a fact.
How far back really should scientists go when comparing temperatures?
We have to go, I think, at least 10,000 years, even 2,000 years back to what I call the medieval warm period, to find that was warmer than it is today. It's just the common sense person knows that in the Roman warm period, the previous one, the Romans were growing citrus in the north of England. During the medieval warm period, the Vikings in Greenland, there are still Vikings buried deeply in permafrost. And the other common sense thing people really understand, our glaciers are retreating right now. And they have been since the early 1800s. As they're retreating, they're exposing archaeological information on farms and villages. They're exposing mature forests that are not. Well, think about that. As this glacier is now retreating, we're seeing mature trees being exposed. It had to have been a lot warmer at that time. It's just common sense things like that that people get, and we can do it for many different things. But if you just look at the last 300 years, yeah, it's been warmer. But I'm a huge proponent of the many benefits of modest warming and increasing CO2. And my philosophy is that we should use all of Earth's resources for the betterment of mankind and do it as good stewards. And that's a great philosophy.
So when it comes to climate change then, Greg, what part of it is really played by carbon dioxide?
Well, carbon dioxide is increasing. The increase in carbon dioxide is due mainly to our burning of fossil fuels, about 6% due to cement manufacture that people don't know. But it's due to us. We've increased, let's just say 130 parts per million to a little over 400. That increase is due to us. It's a greenhouse gas. It provides some warming, greenhouse warming to the atmosphere. I just believe it's very modest and overwhelmed by those same natural forces that have been driving temperature since the late 1600s. And we see, well, the first half of the 20th century had virtually no carbon dioxide driven warming, but yet it warmed at about the same rate as what we have in the post World War II when we started adding a lot of CO2. Those same natural forces that have been in action since the dawn of time didn't stop in the middle or start in the middle of the 20th or stop in the middle of the 20th century. They're in action today just as they have been, again, since the dawn of time. And it's just common sense. People need to understand that as a geologist, we look at what happened in the past. We say those processes are acting today as they did in the past.
There are actually concerns that glaciers are disappearing from the Canadian Arctic landscape. Your thoughts on that?
I haven't seen specifics about that. There are Canadian glaciers all over the world, again, are in retreat, but the retreat is not accelerating because of CO2. If you look at the glacial retreat, I've got a chart in my book of 169 glaciers all over the Northern Hemisphere showing that rate's about the same as it was in the mid 1800s, where there was no CO2 driven. And if we look, Dr. Timothy Ball has a study I just looked at in terms of tree line in Canada. The tree line has moved northward 100 kilometers, according to Dr. Ball, over the last 100 years. We can just trace that northward. So it's happening. Yes, welcome it, embrace it. Back before climate science became politicized, those warm periods were called climate optima. They were called climate optima for a reason, because both the Earth's ecosystems and humanity prospered by the warming. Again, food was bountiful, food was plentiful, and it was the intervening cold that was again, it was horrific.
Now, in another blog you posted earlier this year, you mentioned a study which ran from 2000 to 2018, which concluded that the United States was already in a mega drought, one of the worst in about 1,200 years. The study was based on tree ring data. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, tree ring data is famously, notoriously horrible for a prediction of temperature. But in this particular study, I went and looked at, they predicted this drought, the continuing mega drought that we were in the Southwest United States. Well, I went back and looked at the data. Right after their study was published in 2019, we had the lowest drought in the United States that they had ever recorded since they started recording it. So this mega drought, and they knew it. This data was available before they published that, yet they claimed that this mega drought was ongoing into 2019 and 2020. Yet we see the fewest acres in the United States in drought, and zero in the area they said where this mega drought was occurring. They can't. Again, it's a climate of fear. We need a frightened population, and we've got that. That these kids in our schools today are being taught that they're to blame, their parents are to blame, and we're all going to, mommy, daddy, what am I ever going to do? People aren't having children because of this. And again, we're being silenced, people like me. I've had personal experience with that, with being silenced. I'm doing it right now. My local environmental advisory committee in my township I live in, it actually made a rule change to prevent me from getting on the committee. They were going to, yeah, and we're in the process right now. So they made that rule change to 40 years of charter of the township charter. They didn't want me, a science denier, and a radical pro-environment energy guy, to be on the committee. If I was a 28-year-old with a man bun, and I thought the Earth was going to end in 12 years, man, they'd have me on that committee tomorrow. They couldn't get me on their committee fast enough. So what did I do? I immediately launched a Right to Know Freedom of Information Act request to the committee. And we're going to find out what they had to say. It'll be interesting to see the emails going back and forth between each of them, talking about, oh, this is a science denier. We can't allow him on the committee. And he wants to do fracking and provide energy. We can't have that. So, that's just happening right now.
Gregory Wrightstone, geologist and author of the bestseller Inconvenient Facts. Thanks a lot for joining us today from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Hal.